Hi there, this is the video tutorial for Get Real, which is the 9th assignment in Imagining Architecture, the final assignment. In the previous video tutorial, I showed you how to make a single point and a 2-point perspective. And in this one, we're going to look at some basic rendering tools in Photoshop. So what we're going to take from SketchUp is just the lines, the geometry, and the shadows. So you already know how to set up scenes. And if you have materials or colors or anything like that, we'll turn that off by going into styles, going to select default styles, which is the 5th one. So it's just lines. And we also don't want those guides. We don't want those axes. So we'll turn them off under view. Okay, and we're going to do one export which has the shadows on like this and one which has them off. And I can turn them on and off by hitting this icon in the shadow palette, and I'll choose the time of day. And in the previous assignment, you will have geolocated the model so that the shadows are correct for the location. Okay, so I'll go ahead and export this at 300 dpi, not 300 dpi, 3000 pixels wide. So I go into options, go for the width 3000. Again, if your computer struggles with that, you can do a bit lower, but it's good to go for 3000 if you can. And we do want transparent background. And PNG is the format. I'll call this one with shadows. And then the next one is just the geometry. Okay, options should be the same, yes, and we'll call this one lines. Okay, then in Photoshop, we're going to start a new file. It's always good to start with a new file, which you know is going to be the size of the output. I'm going to start with an A4 page. We'll do it in landscape, but when you're collating it in InDesign, you can collate it in portrait format. You can do the image itself can be in either landscape or portrait, it's up to you. So I'm starting a new page and I want to make sure that that is the resolution of the output that I want. So it's A4 and it's 300 dpi. That's perfect. It's always better to start with a clean page, which is the size of your output. Then I'm going to open these two exports. I'm going to copy them into that file. So remember, the quick way to copy from one file to another is Control A to select all, Control C, back to my sheet, Control V, and the same for this one, Control A, Control C, Control V. So we've got 3 layers, the background is fixed, then I've got sun, shadows, and geometry. I'm going to start just with the geometry for now, so I'll turn off the shadows, and I'm going to choose a region. You can see if I use the magic wand tool over here and I turn on contiguous because I want it to respect the boundaries, which is the lines in the drawing, and anywhere I go, it's going to select the regions. If you're missing any lines, for instance, if you have cylinders in your model, SketchUp isn't very good at exporting cylindrical lines. You might want to draw them on using the pencil tool, which is here under the brush tool. Draw it on your geometry line and set the pixel width to be 1, so it's a really thin line. I wouldn't generally recommend drawing in Photoshop, but this is how you do it if you need to. You just click once, hold down Shift to draw straight lines. Again, this is just so that we have a geometry that we can select within the boundaries. And that's only really if you have cylinders in your model. But once you have the geometry all set up, we can select a region. I'll select the ceiling. And then I'm going to go to the internet and choose a texture. I'll start with you could go for a grit or a grunge texture if you don't have a particular material you know it is, and you just want to give it a texture. These are kind of concrete textures. I'll go for one that isn't too dramatic. I want it to be kind of neutral, but to have a bit of texture. And when I'm entering the texture, I always write in seamless. I want to be able to tile it without getting seams, and I'll explain what that means in a few minutes. Let's go with this one that it's offering. So I can save it onto my computer if you want to start a library on your computer, but I'm just going to copy it for now. And I would normally just say paste, but in this case, because I have a region selected, I'm going to go paste, special, paste into, and now it's pasted it, and it's automatically made a mask, which is the region that I had selected. You can see it's smaller than that region, so I can just expand it. It's only going to expand within the region that was selected, so the mask hides everything else. The scale of that texture is too big. You can see it's just too rough. So let's look at choosing a different texture. This time I'm going to enter concrete texture seamless. Go for one that is a bit less dramatic. That one's probably good. Alright, this one has, you can see watermarks on it. I want to get one that doesn't have that. This doesn't look great in an image to have those watermarks. So I'm going to copy the image back to Photoshop, repeat the process. So I'm going to select the floor this time. Make sure my drawing, my geometry is the active layer when I do the selection. So make that active and then click the region with the magic wand, edit, paste special, paste into. So that is a slightly less dramatic texture. And I might squeeze it down like that. Okay, so we've got a floor, a ceiling, which I'm not too happy with. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of that layer for the ceiling, and I'm going to make the selection again. So select it with the magic wand tool in the geometry layer, which is the lines. Go back to my texture, I'll go for this one, lighter one, copy the image, edit, paste special, paste into. And I'm going to reduce the opacity of that. The texture isn't too great, and it's okay if it's lighter opacity. Okay, now I'm going to look at putting brick on this texture here. And with brick, you really want to make sure to use a seamless texture. So let's look at stitching some brick textures together. Where we got it here. So I'll choose one. They all are seamless because I put seamless in the search. I was going to go for, that is a watermark. That is a watermark. That one has a watermark. That one doesn't. Let's go for that. So I'm going to copy it into Photoshop. I'm going to do this in a new file. So Control N to make a new file. It's automatically going to offer me a file which is the size of the clipboard. So I'll just hit enter and paste the brick. That is tiny. You can see it's really pixelated. I'm going to choose a different one. I'm going to go up here and go to under the setting, under the tools. Oh, it's already set to large. Okay. About no, that one. So copy. Do the same thing again. Control N for new. Enter to go with the clipboard and paste. And that's okay for the purposes I'm going to use it for. I'm going to duplicate the layer. So different ways to duplicate layer. You can just drag it onto the new layer symbol, or you can right click and say, right click the layer name and say duplicate layer. Once you've got a duplicate, I'm going to slide it off screen like that until it snaps to the end. Then go to image, reveal all, And then I'm going to merge that down. So Control E to merge. Do the same thing again. So duplicate the layer, move it sideways. That's too far. Okay, try it again. Move it sideways till it snaps. Get the pink line, an image, reveal all, and merge. You can see you're not seeing us. There's no seam. There's no joint between those lines, which is good. I'm going to do one more. It's easy to build up a large area of brick this way. Image, reveal all. That's big enough for the wall I'm doing, so I'll merge that down. Control A to copy it, Control C, no, and Control V to paste. But I'm going to select the brick first. Select it, edit, paste special, paste into. Now this just gone in straight. So I want to tweak the perspective on it. I'll use the control points. If you don't see the control points, make sure you have show transform controls on here. And then holding down control, I can tweak those. I'll just do it by eye. With these things, generally if things look okay by eye, then that is good enough. It's only your eye that's ever going to be judging this. So that looks about right to me. Down. And that's for the brick. And I can do the other surfaces. And if I'll do another surface just to show another example of how I might make a slightly darker brick surface. So edit, paste into, do the same thing, use the control points to get the angle right. Now ideally I would be lining up the joints around the corner. I don't have time to do that right now, but yeah, you can see that they're different sizes. So in your own time you can do that properly. But for now that's good enough for me. And if it's something just in the background, it might be fine. Okay, now let's look at thinking about the horizon in this image. So if I select the geometry layer again, you can see the control point, and by default in SketchUp or any other modeling program, the horizon line is always in the middle of the image. That's just how the virtual camera in the software works. So if I want to highlight the horizon, I'm going to bring a ruler down. So let's show our rulers under View, Rulers, click into the ruler space and drag down, and I'll release at the horizon. So that's the horizon of the image. The sky comes down to the horizon and the ground goes up to the horizon. If there's mountains or buildings or trees, they're going to be above the horizon, but generally that is the vanishing point along that horizon line. So let's bring in a sky, for example. I'm going to go to here, just searching a clear sky. Generally you want to go for a relatively low-key sky, no dramatic apocalyptic sunsets. Even these are a bit too bright for me. I'm going to go for a gray sky. Because you don't, oh, these are just too dramatic. Maybe this one. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to select this sky. I select everything that is sky, and I can minus everything else from that selection. So go to marquee, minus. I'll take everything out up to the horizon line. Then edit, paste special, paste into. Then you want to match the horizon line. So don't want anything above the horizon like that. And might need to twist it a bit. Okay. And we're going to play with the crop afterwards, but for now, that is good enough. I don't actually want those which is pretty done like that. And now let's think about, what's in the foreground on the ground. Maybe it's a meadow. If I search meadow here, you don't want to go tiling images of grass. That is way too time consuming and doesn't have a very good effect. So if you think of a ground surface that matches what you're thinking of, just search that, and we'll take, say from this meadow here, I'm going to take the foreground of this image. So copy, I can just paste it straight in. Gonna put it to the back behind everything else, and generally you just want to roughly match the horizon line. There we go. And it looks okay in terms of perspective. It's a bit funny, that path, so I might make it bigger so you don't see that path. Not gonna work. So let's go for an image that doesn't have a path in the middle of it. The path is coming right out of the house. Go for that one. So got same thing again. Gonna paste it in. This again is generally a process of trial and error. So get rid of that one, and I'm gonna copy this new one instead. And the same principle, match the horizon line. You might find an image that has a sky and a foreground together, and that might work best. Let's look next at putting in some people, or what's called the entourage of an image. So there's different websites that have people on them. This is an example, Skallgruber, which is a Swedish one. Another one which was made kind of as a reaction to Skallgruber is this one called Non-Scandinavian, which has you could say a more diverse grouping of people. Then there's this one which we used before, pimpmydrawing.com. If you're doing it for images, download the AI file rather than the DWG. And another one is Mr. Cutout. You just make it an account with them and you can download. They have lots of stuff, not just people, vegetation and trees and things like that. I'm going to go with one of these non-Scandinavian ones, and they have kind of pixelated out the people's faces. That's kind of to protect the identity of those people who probably never knew they were being photographed. So let's just copy someone into the image. I'm going to put them to the foreground. Use the magic wand tool to get rid of the black. And then the trick to putting things in people in an image in a way that looks correct is to put their eyes on the horizon line, or their head on the horizon line. If they're a tall person, they're going to be a bit taller than you. If they're a shorter person, they're going to be a bit shorter than the horizon. But on average, if they're standing on the same plane as the camera, then their eyes are going to be around the same height. I'm going to mirror her. So flip horizontal, I want her to face the other way. And let's go for another person. Actually, this time I'm going to try putting in one of these people. I wouldn't mix drawing and image. Let's just see how. These are all a bit silly, actually. She kind of makes sense. Let's go for her. Then when I'm putting a drawing into the image, I go File, Place. I can go Place and choose that file. Just go with the default settings, and you can then resize. Again, I wouldn't mix drawn and photographic. It looks a bit strange. I just want to show you the different ways of bringing people in, and to illustrate also the principle of the eye is on the horizon and regardless of size. So let's make a duplicate of her and put her further in the distance. She might be out in the meadow. So all these people are at different depths in the image, but they all look like they belong in the image. If I want to hide the ruler, I can go up to view and just turn off rulers and turn off extras. Okay, so next let's think about the crop of the image. As I said, by default, SketchUp always gives us the horizon line in the middle, but that might not necessarily be where you want it for the composition of your image. And what I do for making a provisional crop, because I don't want to crop the image at the beginning, I want to keep the flexibility, I make these white rectangles. So I make a new layer, marquee, a rectangle. I'm going to hit white as my color and I drop it on. Then I just duplicate that layer, copy it down to the bottom. Turn on, back on extras so I can see my control clouds. Gonna duplicate it again and go to the side. And again to the other side. And then I will tweak these until I'm happy with the composition. You might want to put the horizon quite low in the image, like this, although it doesn't really make sense to have a huge ceiling like that. It depends very much on what kind of view you're making. Or I might decide I want it to be a much more vertical image. So I might crop out the sides and make it much more about what's happening vertically. It depends where you want the focus to be. I think for this image I might make it a wide angle image. So I'm going to crop it up and down like this, and I'm going to turn off the sides. Might turn them on enough just to hide the edges. Okay. So it's good to have people at different depths in an image. Sometimes it's good to have people right in the foreground like this to make it feel kind of like you're on the edge of the image. So I can bring her like she is just walking into the space, for example, and then this woman I might make smaller so she's deeper in the scene. Okay, so we've got the some textures, we've got some people. Change the crop. Now let's bring back the shadows. We go back down here and I'm going to bring the geometry and the shadow layer. I'm going to bring them up to the top. Let's see what we can do. So let's first of all see if I just turn off the geometry. What does it look like? A bit crazy. So probably won't go with that. Let's put. Sometimes you might turn off the geometry and it might look okay, but in this case it looks quite strange. So let's not do that. Let's put the shadows on top and turn them on. That kind of flattens the image and you can see it's made a lot of stuff opaque. But if we set it to multiply, then the shadows become more transparent, but they're in front of the people. That's what the problem here is. So we need to put those two geometry layers behind the crops, those cropping frames, but behind and also behind the people. So there's my three people. Bring them up in front of the geometry. At this point, it's good to start organizing the image. You can see I've got a lot of layers here, and it's very easy to very quickly have too many layers. So these top four is the frame. I'm going to group them. I'm going to Control G, and I'll rename the group frame. These are the people. Group those three layers. So to group, you just select each layer like that. Hold down Shift to do multiple select. Control G. Not working. You can right click and say group somewhere here. It won't let me group the woman the drawn woman because it's this AI file. So if I right click that, I'm gonna maybe I can just group them on their own. Yeah. So they're the line people. And then if I had another, let's go for another photographic person. And you're looking for people that make sense in the image, and not something that looks like a joke or that doesn't really make sense. So maybe this person coming home from school. Not them, not him. Where did she go? Her. So I'm going to copy her into the image and delete the black. Control D to deselect. And she can be outside. If I still had that path, she could be coming down the path, but path's gone now. So let's just make sure her head is on the horizon. I'm going to lose those drawn people because I don't think they're really working. So just turning off the layer with the drawn people, and I'm going to group these people. Then I'll group these two and call them geometry. Just double click the name and that allows you to rename it. So this is geometry. These are the textures. And this is the background. So once you have organized the file like that, it becomes a lot easier to work with because you don't have all these hundreds of layers, and you just expand a group like this to see what's inside it. And if I want to move, I can just select the individual people. If they are all behaving as, if the group is all behaving as one, you can always take something out of a group by just grabbing it and then sliding up above the group until you get that blue line in between. And then it becomes an independent layer again. Or to add something to a group, select it and just drop it onto the group until the group gets highlighted in blue like that, and drop it and it goes inside. Okay, now my brick has disappeared. Let's see, where has that gone? It's here, but this geometry is in front of it. So let's put that underneath. But we'll keep the shadows in front. So this one can be geometry, and this one can be shadows. So I don't need to group that anymore. Just make it a layer on itself, and I'll get rid of the geometry group. So the shadows on and off, it's set to multiply, so I can see through the shadow. I can see through to the texture underneath. Let's just see at this point. Does it make sense? Turn off the geometry? No, it doesn't. It looks strange. So let's go with that. I've got a strange floating building here in the background. That's also what looks a bit strange. Now, once I've got the various textures that I want in, and you don't have to, it's not like a game of coloring in. You don't necessarily have to color in everything. So I might leave some things white like this. I have a kind of funny thing going on here, so I'm going to make the side crop a little bit wider. But once I'm happy with the image, I can then do overall effects onto it. So let's go back to layers, and this is where we start using adjustment layers. I'm going to do these on top. So let's go, I'm going to do it above the people and behind the frame. So I'm going to go to adjustment layer. One might be hue saturation. This would be where I might desaturate the image entirely if you want to make it black and white. Or sometimes it's good to just desaturate it a bit, because there's a tendency to make images which are too kind of garish, or the colors are too bright. It's always good to make it a bit more muted, bring it down a bit. My sky is actually quite gloomy there. I might replace it with a better sky. Let's try also another adjustment layer where I go curves is always a good one. Under curves I can make it lighter, globally lighter. And if you're printing an image, so it's good to do a test print, because some prints make things look much darker than they are on screen. And remember, a screen is backlit, so there's light coming out of the image, and when you print it, it's going to look darker. So if that is the case, it's good to use curves to make it lighter. And if you need it again, need another one, just duplicate it. And sometimes an image might look too bright on screen, but for a print, that might be correct. If it's for a digital presentation, then if it looks right on the screen, then it's correct. So that one might be fine. I don't need the second one. Other adjustment layers that can be good are levels, which is pretty much the same. It has the same kind of effect as curves. You can choose lighter, darker, or increased contrast. Let's go for the... I've already got curves, so I don't really need that. Although a little bit might be good. Maybe just a slightly less opacity. And then another one that's good is color balance. So here we can change the general tone of the image. I can choose the shadows, midtones, or highlights. Let's go for highlights, and then I can make them a bit warmer by sliding towards yellow and red. Same for midtones, bit towards yellow, bit towards red. Same for shadows, bit towards yellow, bit towards red. Now you can see the effect of that by turning it on and off. Might be a bit too orange, in which case I can just turn down the opacity of that adjustment layer. So I've got 5 adjustment layers here, and adjustment layers are very good for making overall changes to the mood of the image after you've done composition and basic rendering. Once I've got all of those, I'll select them all. Select the first one, get onto the bottom one, hold down Shift, select the last one. That's how you multiple select. Then I'm going to group them. We call that effects. Okay, so this image is about finished for me. I would like you to save out work in progress as you go. So to do that, you're going to go to File, Save As, JPEG, and might call it Step 1. Although in this case, this is Step 10, or whatever the last step is. So you might need to go backwards, although it's better to just do it as you go. Start saving out work in progress. There's something really weird here, which is the sky shining through. There's a weird grass shining through the window. I'm going to see if I can get to the bottom of that. Let's put the sky behind the... Nope, that's not it. I'm going to select that region in the geometry, and I'm going to make it visible in the sky. So go to the sky mask, go to my brush, which is under the pencil, change my brush to white, and paint that on, and it'll go the same color as the sky. If the sky is a bit gloomy, I can duplicate the sky and set it to screen and make it lighter. That's too light. Overlay might also. That's another thing I want to show you is filters, which are up here. Filters, there's lots of them, but you can only do them on a layer. So I want to make a layer which is a flattened version of my image, and to do that I go to the top layer or the top group, and I do this shortcut, which is Control Alt Shift E, all at the same time. Just see, is there a button for that? There's flatten, merge visible, but that's going to flatten all my layers. So this one, I don't know where it is on the menu, but I know that the shortcut for it is Control Alt Shift E. That gives me a layer. I can see if I can move it, and it is all of the layers combined as one behind, but I still have all the independent layers behind that. So it's a useful tool for making a layer which is a flattened version of all the other layers. And once I've done that, with that layer active, I can go to my filters, and you should proceed with caution with these because some of them are a bit tacky, but one that I like is Smart Blur. And here I can, this is giving me a preview of what I'm going to get. There's different options, so I can go normal. So there's different options for the smart blur. You can go into normal, edge only, or overlay edge. And you're going to start with normal. You can see it's just kind of blurring the image, because sometimes when things come from a collection of photographs, they just don't always merge well together, and a blurred version of it can sometimes be better. And you can up and down these until you're happy with it. Like when it's down at the bottom, it does not doing anything, but move them up and you start seeing the effects. You can see it's kind of keeping the lines straight, but it's blurring the images. If I change the quality, it's also going to change that, set it to high, and change the radius. So it's doing different things. I'll say OK to commit to that, see what it looks like. It's going to take a minute to process it. And you see that's probably too blurred. So it's trial and error. Looks a bit strange. So let's try again. I'm going to turn that layer off and do it again. Control Alt Shift E. Got a filter, blur, smart blur. This time I'm going to try edge only. It's going to be black and white, and go to low, and it's going to give me this inverted black and white version of the scene, and I can choose how much I want it to draw lines around. Maybe something like that in higher region. And then it's going to make this black and white version of the scene. Might want it to be like that, or I might want to invert it. So I go to image, adjustments, invert, and then it's going to be a black lines on a white background. So we went all the way through from SketchUp through Photoshop, and we're ending up with just a line drawing again, but it's quite nice. And you might leave it like that, or you could do other things like set it to multiply, so it's overlaid on the original image. Maybe set down its opacity so it's not quite as intense. You can just see, compared to the original, it has more of a kind of illustration quality than the original one. Or I could set it to overlay, set it back up to 100, and that's just too bleached out really. I think multiply was working better, but add a lower opacity. So if you could experiment with those filters. Other ones which can be interesting are, have to be careful here because there are bad ones. Well, general blur can be useful. Pixelate halftone is kind of interesting. I'll show you what that looks like. So just made another duplicate layer, so that's Control Alt Shift E to make a layer which is the same as all the others. Then you go to filter, pixelate, and do they say halftone? This gives you a kind of comic book effect, but that's probably too blurry. So I'll just go undo and see, can I modify that? Max radius, maybe it's that. So I'll try that, taking that down and see what it does. Okay, it's got to be 4 at a minimum. So it probably depends on the size of the image whether that works or not. That could be quite effective, and it really depends on how big it's displayed. It looks quite nice actually. Let's see what a desaturated version of that might be like. So image, adjustments, desaturate. So that's only desaturated that layer, and it gives you kind of a newsprint effect. Again, you can always combine the filters with blending modes, so set it to multiply or overlay, and so something we can see once you started using the filters, the original photographic version looks a bit too much like what it is, which is a Photoshop collage. But once you start putting filters over it, it can help take away from that a little bit, so it looks more like an illustration. I think this is my favorite one. You can try a few different versions, and remember, just save out work in progress and collate it all in InDesign. And if you have any questions, let me know, and I can make a video tutorial on any other questions people might have about this. Okay, thank you.